You saw someone you cared about drifting towards something destructive. You saw it happening, slowly, clearly, and you said nothing. Not because you didn't love her. You told yourself you didn't want to overstep. You didn't want to come across as judgmental. You didn't want to lose the friendship. You called that gentleness. But was it? Biblical gentleness is not weakness. So what if what we're calling gentleness is actually fear? Fear of conflict, fear of losing approval, fear of what it might cost us to speak. Then whatever that is, it was never biblical gentleness to begin with. It just borrowed the name. So how do you tell the difference between the real thing and its counterfeit? First, realize that we often confuse peacekeeping with peacemaking. There's a difference between keeping everything calm and actually pursuing peace. Sometimes peacekeeping simply means nobody says anything difficult. The tension remains, the sin remains, the falsehood remains, but everyone stays polite. And because nobody raised his voice, we call that peace. Biblical peace can require something more difficult. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." A peacemaker does not just avoid conflict. Sometimes a peacemaker has to enter into the conflict. And if two people are divided, making peace may require a difficult conversation. If someone has sinned against another person, making peace may require naming the wrong. If error is harming the church, making peace may require correction. That does not mean every offense deserves confrontation. Scripture also teaches us to overlook offenses, bear with one another, and refuse to insist on our rights. But there's a difference between overlooking an offense because love can absorb it and ignoring a problem because we just don't want to deal with it. Surface calm is not always peace. Sometimes genuine peace requires the courage to disturb the calm. Second, we fear people more than we fear God. This may be one of the deepest reasons we mistake weakness for gentleness. We tell ourselves, I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want them to think I'm judgmental. I don't want to damage the relationship. And those concerns can certainly be legitimate. We should care how we speak. We should not enjoy offending people. But there's another question underneath all of that. Whose displeasure am I most afraid of? Sometimes we remain silent because we fear people more than we fear God. Peter himself fell into this. Galatians 2 says that Peter withdrew from eating with Gentile believers because he was afraid of the circumcision party. He knew better. The gospel had already taught him better. But fear of people changed his behavior. And Paul confronted him. That's important because Paul, the man who tells us to be gentle, did not treat gentleness as an excuse to remain silent when fear of man was compromising the truth of the gospel. Proverbs says, the fear of man brings a snare. When someone's approval becomes too important to us, it can control what we say and what we refuse to say. And we can even give that fear a spiritual name. We can call it gentleness. But biblical gentleness is governed by the fear of God, not the fear of people. It wants to please God enough to speak when He requires speech, and to remain quiet when He requires restraint. Third, we protect our own comfort. Sometimes the person we are really protecting is not the other person. It's ourselves. We say, I just want to keep the peace. But what we may really mean is, I do not want this conversation. I don't want this awkwardness. I don't want to bear the emotional cost. I don't want someone getting upset with me. That's not necessarily gentleness. It may simply be self-protection. And this is where biblical gentleness can actually require courage. It is often easier to stay silent than to speak carefully. Easier to avoid the conversation than to have it lovingly. It's easier sometimes to let a problem grow than to risk being misunderstood. Gentleness is not controlled by the desire to remain comfortable. It is controlled by love. Love of people, yes, but also love of God. If someone sins against me personally, love may lead me to absorb the offense and let it go. But if someone is walking into serious error, harming another person, or distorting the truth, then love may require me to speak. Silence can sometimes be selfish. Not because we hate the other person, but because we love our comfort too much. Fourth, love sometimes requires confrontation. This is where the New Testament certainly helps us keep the balance. Remember, Paul told Timothy, the Lord's bondservant must not be quarrelsome, but be kind to all, with gentleness correcting those who are in opposition. Now notice what Paul does not say. He does not say, be gentle, so don't ever correct anybody. No, he says correct them gently. And those are two very different things. Christian love does not eliminate correction. It changes the manner of correction. Jesus corrected people. Paul corrected people. Parents must at times correct their children. Pastors correct error. Christians sometimes have to say hard things to one another. But the goal is never to crush someone. It's never to prove I'm smarter than you are. It's never to win. Biblical correction is aimed at the good of the person being corrected. That means there are a couple of ways to fail. One, we've talked about, is harshness. We tell the truth without love. We become quarrelsome, abrasive, combative. But the other is weakness. We claim to love people so much that we refuse to obey the Bible. We claim to love people so much that we refuse to tell them the truth at all. Scripture does not allow either of those extremes. Love tells the truth. Gentleness governs how we tell it. So, when does gentleness become weakness? Strictly speaking, biblical gentleness never does. But what we call gentleness can become a disguise for something else. We can confuse peacekeeping with peacemaking. We can fear people more than we fear God. We can protect our own comfort. And we can refuse the kind of loving confrontation Scripture sometimes requires. Biblical gentleness is willing to yield when the issue is merely my preference or my rights. But it's also willing to stand when truth, love, or faithfulness requires it. That leaves us with the harder question. How do you know which moment you are in? When should you let something go? And when must you stand firm? We'll cover that next time.